Welcome to my little tutorial on a little DIY system for you. But I wanted to first start with, essentials that you would have in general. So as a horticulturist, whether you're a professional or you're at home, you're gonna need to do some manual watering. And so you always wanna make sure that you have the correct device, the instrument that's gonna be helpful to you. So, a lot of us are used to this, and this is what we would call our breaker. Okay, so the breaker is just located at the end. I'm not a fan of these. This is what I grew up with, so maybe it's just because it was my mother's, But this is what we started using once I was in college at a bona fide agricultural school. And so this is our wand, and then we have an aluminum wand, so it's really lightweight. And then we have a breaker. Now you can change the breakers out, and it will help you so that you can really adjust and fine tune your watering. So the breaker, the ones that I like are from Dram, and no, I'm not sponsored in this content, but Dram is a great company. This is a Dram wand. You can get different lengths of wands. So like if you're doing hanging baskets, they can be really tall. But this one in particular is probably their cheapest version, and it's just a typical, lots of little tiny little holes right here that emit the water, but you can get them really small. So like at my house, I have terrible water pressure on one of my hoses, so I use a very small breaker to really help to get that pressure out there. This one is just a nice gentle flow. So for this, you can see basically how that pressure is coming out of here. It's a good flow, but this is kind of even heavy for like, if I'm doing like a large garden bed, this would be great. Something that I can use. It's just a nice, gentle, not gonna hurt my plants. But if I'm doing something that is going to need a little bit less pressure than this, I can reduce how much water I have, and I can, cut it down so it's not quite as heavy. So like when I'm doing these little vegetable plants, if I were trying to use that heavier, more powerful pressure, that would have blown those little guys away. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna be setting up our actual system. So this is just a kit. It was like $25, something that I purchased again from Jeff. He delivers right to my door, so I was like, no big deal. And we're gonna be planting some of these little cabbage starts. And so I'm gonna kind of take you and walk you through the different parts of this system. But one of the things that we're gonna look at first is how do you actually check your pressure? So it's really important for us before we put in any system that we understand what our PSI is, or pounds per square inch of pressure. So some of you might want to have a very simple system where you're connected to a water, like a rain barrel. And in a rain barrel, and you've got a hose coming out of it, you're barely going to have any pressure, and it's not going to be enough pressure to run most drip systems. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So for our system that we're going to use is a drip system. This is perfect for a home gardener, and we are going to focus and see how much pressure we need. So let's check that out. All right, so one of the things that we really need to be able to check on is what is our PSI? What's our pounds per square inch? And this is a PSI gauge that you can hook up to your water so that you can easily see how many pounds per square inch of pressure we're gonna have. For the system that we're using, it suggests anywhere from 45 to 70 PSI. So we're on city water, and we have quite a bit of pressure here, probably enough that we could just blow this off and, no big deal. But this little guy right here is something good to have in your toolbox because it is $9.98 exactly, okay? So this one's from Rainbird, which is a company that has irrigation. So I'm just gonna quick show you how you would it's so simple. All you're gonna do is have your hose running, and then you're just gonna turn this on. And you can see right now I've got another hose running and this, and it's already at just about 45. So if I had just the one hose running, it would be easily 60 PSI. So that tells me we're good to go. So if our system didn't have enough PSI, then I could add something like a boost or a pump. So for instance, if you're like, I'm dead set on using a cistern, which is a really large storage tank for water, or I want to go ahead and I want to use a rain barrel, you can, but you have to buy a boost or a pump that you would go along with that. And you would attach it to the actual spigot so that it can really help to increase how much water you get. So it just depends on, you know, first of all, do you have city water? Are you in the country? You know, if you're on an industrial line, like you're in an apartment building or something, you're going to have most of the time great pressure. But especially for people who live out in the country, that's where it gets a little dodgy because you're hooked up to a well. All right, so now that we're ready to get started in our kit that we're going to use, and I'll have a link to this kit, so if you're like, that seems perfect for me. This is, you know, we don't have to use this in a garden bed that's raised. We can use it in container production. There's a million different types of kits that you can purchase depending on what your needs are. And of course, you don't have to even buy a kit. You could just get a few things that you need. But one of the things we're going to do is we've got to have, so this is our male part of our hose, right? And we need to get it to a female adapter. So the female, right, here it is, but we always have leaks. And so one of the things we can use is Teflon tape. So Teflon tape is just a material, of course, everything's derived from plastic. So what we're gonna do though is we're gonna hold on to this and it's gonna go along these threads. And I'm gonna wrap it towards myself, and sometimes it's kind of tricky to get it started, especially when you're trying to do a video for people. So I usually do this about 3 times, and then it breaks right off, and then you're able to thread this, and it's just going to create a really nice seal so that you're not going to have water. Every little drop of water is really precious, and so we don't want to lose that. All right, so then from that point, we're going to want to go ahead and we're going to want to thread our plastic, our main line. So our main line right here, and that's how we're going to get it started. And so this is just a piece of plastic that we can add right to these little grooves right here. And we're just going to be using some of this flexible pipe that you can get. This is the same kind of stuff that you'd find like for aquarium pumps. So it's no different. So we have 2 different types of lines. So we have our main line, which is going to be a larger pipe. And then we've got this skinnier spaghetti tubing that we're going to be using as well. But, you know, you can see from here, this is like one of those design issues. I've got to get the water into here, so I need to have a long piece of pipe right here. So I'm just going to cut something that can get from here into here. So I want to cut that at a straight angle. And then I'm just going to make sure that I have this little 3-way splitter. Okay, so the 3-way splitter is what's going to help me to get the whole party started. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this is on there. And then I'm going to have this piece on here. And it's very simple. You just kind of got to adjust it a little bit. Put this guy down on there, and then you're going to thread that. Just screw it on there tight. And now this should be really secure. And so from this point, I'm going to have the other end on here. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing. And you can see there's like a little barb at the end that kind of helps to secure that pipe. And so now I've got this ready to go, and we'll get started from that point on. So now that we have our main line, right, and we're going to have 2 lateral main lines, so we're going to take off of that. I'm going to go ahead and hook those up to this T, because these lateral main lines are then going to run down the length of the bed. And again, I'm using the same format as I was here, and I'm just screwing these pieces of line just so I can get to that first space. So this first head is going to take me to where I'm going to then start putting in my actual emitters. So emitters are where the water starts to come out. So let's go ahead and see how that works. Okay, so now this is a little bit different. So this is going to have, you can see these larger pegs right here are for our main line, our main lateral line. And then we're going to have our spaghetti tubing coming off to the side, where these will be on the perpendicular joint. That's where we're going to have our water coming off, our emitters. So again, I'm following the same protocol, taking this putting it right in here. And then just a simple, you know, screw on that. All right, now for this, the spaghetti tubing, this is gonna be a little different. This is gonna go into these pegs, and there's actually a little like valve kind of barb that helps to connect it. And once it's in there, it's in there. So there's no taking it out. So for this side, I'm gonna go ahead and figure out, you know, what might want my lengths to be. And then I'm gonna connect more of this larger tubing to go down to where my next space is. Now in this bed, I don't have that many of these spaghetti tubings that I'm gonna really need because, you know, in a typical space like this, we would only wanna plant one plant basically every 12 to 18 inches, depending on what kind of, one plant depending on every 12 to 18 inches, depending on what our plant is. But for something like cabbage, you know, 12 inches is probably gonna be okay. And so we just wanna make sure that all of this entire bed has coverage. The other thing we've got to think about is we actually want our spaghetti tubing where we have the emitters to overlap. We don't want to have where the water just barely touches each other. So we want the water to actually overlap so that we have spaces that we ensure coverage, that everything is covered. Okay, so I have two different types of emitters that I can put on that are stand-up, and then I also have one that could be like attached just on the ground if I wanted. So this is just a drip emitter. It's just gonna slowly drip out a little bit of water here. But these two are pop-up heads, basically. They're just gonna, you put them into the soil and they're gonna be there. And you can adjust how much water comes out there. There's a plus and a minus there. This one is gonna come out so that it looks like spider legs. And this is gonna be a round funnel. So I thought just because, you know, this is for education, we'll do a little of both. So we'll try both of these. All right, so again, this goes in and it's just a simple press. And you wanna be careful because if you end up getting some sediment in here, that's where we have a lot of problems. But the good news is with these, you can usually flush out a lot of the debris if you do end up getting. Drip systems are not a one and done. No irrigation system is. It requires a lot of upkeep and maintenance. All right, again, we're gonna put in these two spaghetti lines. And then these go to our emitters, just like this. And this is, again, the different one that's gonna be more of a funnel. So now from here, I can put these in the bed and I can adjust them, you know, to where I want them to be so that I have good coverage. And if I find that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is too much line, or, you know, I can always adjust these, right? And I can adjust my tubing so I could cut some off if I need to really get an idea of where this needs to go. So it may be something that I'm like, I find out, oh, I didn't quite cut it correctly. That's okay, because you can always cut off, you can't add more. So just remember that if you make your lines too long, it's not a problem. Just, you know, you can reduce them later. All right, so now that I've got these placed, I need to, if we were going to continue this on, I would have more of this main line and I would keep running all the way down. But if we were just going to do this one little section, there are actually these little caps that you would put in place, and that's just going to ensure that we can stop the water flow. So it's the same process that we've been doing over and over again. And so now I've got this where I could take this off eventually and I could keep running this line. But for right now, I'm just gonna stop that. Another thing you might wanna invest in to help put this stuff down are these little ground staples. So ground staples are really effective in helping to secure and put in place where you want your spikes to go, or where you want your lines to go, so you can hold them in your space. Another, you know, suggestion, if you were like, I don't want these to be, you know, up high, I want them just to be down low, and I want to have the drip just going on a specific plant, you would use this type of emitter. So that's something like if I wanted to, and I'm going to do this just for posterity so you can see how they work, we would just have this down here, and then that would go directly on our plant at the base. So A lot of times, if you want something to be drip and not have any micro spray, we would put an emitter on that's just going to drip at the soil line. That's the most effective and efficient. It's going to have less disease because we don't want our plants actually to have water. We want to water in the morning whenever we can so that there's time for the water to evaporate. We really don't want the water to get on the leaves if possible. It promotes disease, a lot of fungus. So we want to make sure there's good airflow. And so this type of emitter is a little bit better than that. These are going to be that micro spray, and the micro spray is going to get the foliage wet, but it has better coverage. You're going to have a greater circumference, greater diameter of coverage there. All right, so here we are now. We've got our system up, and we would need to plant our plants, and I'll show you just how that would work in a sec. But this, for right now, just to make sure that we don't have any leaks, that the system's running, I'm going to go ahead and test it. So you can see how you would adjust these heads. You can actually make them so that they don't have quite as much water coming out. You can adjust to the pattern of it. You can make the flow a lot smaller. You can shut it off. You can make it wider if you need to, just by adjusting those heads. So if you're looking for a good old-fashioned wet t-shirt contest, this is a great way to do it. Now, the other thing I would say is that this soil, it's really almost not soil. What it is it's mostly organic matter. And so because of that, these spikes don't want to stay at the top. Now, if you had a heavy clay, you could make this stand up a little bit more. And you can also get types of systems that would have a much longer probe than this. But these would be great too for like containers, hanging baskets. And again, like I said, this one just drips out a little bit, so you have to adjust what you think is most important and works for your plant. Every system is a case by case. Manicure and dirt, aka soil manicure, and so I've placed these plants very quickly, right, just in a space, and this would be about right. We'd want maybe 3 or 4 plants if we're planting tight, which I always have a tendency to plant a little tighter maybe than I should, but 3 or 4 plants, got those spaced, got the water on. I feel like what we do in landscaping in general, as well as home horticulture, it's best to put your lines in first before you actually plant, because if you're trying to get those lines in around your plants afterwards, you're going to be breaking leaves, breaking stems, breaking your back. And so it's best to have your lines run. And then this system is very adjustable. Once you get done, you can cut, you can do whatever you want. So a system like this is going to deliver about 40 gallons per hour. So clearly we don't want that. So a system that's running like this, I'm going to have to kind of check and see what I feel like, but it's going to release, if it's 40 gallons per hour, that's almost a gallon for every minute, half a gallon. So I'm going to adjust and probably make it so that I only let this thing run. It may be like 2 minutes, and you're thinking, wow, like that's not a lot of time. But you've got to look at the delivery. The fastest way for us to kill our plants is overwatering. Plants can struggle through drought. They can struggle through times where they don't get much water. But if you were here in North Carolina this past spring, the water would not shut off. And Mother Nature made it almost impossible for people in horticulture and home gardeners to plant, to keep their plants healthy, because they couldn't respire. And without respiration, we just aren't going to make it, and neither are plants either. So I hope this helps you to start looking at maybe just how simple it is, really. There's nothing to be afraid of. And all I do is make mistakes, and then I just try again. And so you just got to keep working on it and seeing what works best for you.